With the recent rumors of a new Jet Set Radio that most probably is nothing more than guest characters for another game, the franchise shows that there's still some cult interest for it. It's not the biggest franchise in the world, but maybe it could pull a fairly decent amount of numbers with enough publicity. Unfortunately, with the expectations of publishers today, they would probably never be satisfied with anything under 10 million. Maybe a couple of years ago a remake or sequel could have been possible, but now the ship has sailed. As for the original, it was a pretty striking title for the time and a Dreamcast flagship. However, it has the stigma of being this game that only has music and an art style. While it is true that the gameplay has some rough corners, it's not the worst thing in the world. It is however true that the music and visuals are its strongest aspects. The game took heavily from what was popular in Japan back then, the DJ and rock culture of the time. It also explains why in the same game you get 90s club music and Rob Zombie on the same soundtrack. Yes, the song is Dragula. That soundtrack helped Hideki Naganuma make a name for himself. It's something not too dissimilar from Streets of Rage and Yuzo Koshiro, who also worked at Sega. The music is varied and extremely energetic. It speaks of attitude and rebel youth, as does the story and its character designs. The story is bare bones, but this isn't a modern Sony cinematic game, so who cares? It is however hilarious the lengths the police goes to just to eliminate a bunch of teenagers. The characters on the other hand are hard to forget. They probably passed the silhouette test. There's a mix of punk and DJ in their appearance, with each character leaning more to one side than the other. All this is carried by a really strong art style. The cel shading helped it age tremendously, akin to something like Wind Waker. All you need is an HD version or a texture pack. The HD version is available on PS3, 360, and PC. It might be overdone now, but back then that art style wasn't everywhere. Nowadays it seems like a corner cutting method, which ironically ruins the effect. Now enough of the art, how about the gameplay? It's structurally simple. You have 3 types of missions: tagging while fending off the police and rival gangs, pursuing your rivals, and races. There is a 4th type, but it's pretty similar to the first one. More on that later. All of this functions well. Unfortunately, the characters move like tanks. To add insult to injury, there's a long delay between your input and their movement. Precision is not great, which hurts when it is needed. The lack of a second analog on the Dreamcast also hurts. You can only reset the camera, which is the same button that you use to tag. It results in violent spasms when you're trying to interact with the context-sensitive tags. There's also a problem that was a bit more concerning for dedicated players, that there's no stage replay. On stream, I was trying to get the Jet rating on all levels, the highest rating, and once you finish a mission, you're stuck having to retry it every time or exit the game. It's a similar problem to Viewable Joe. You basically have to be perfect on your first time and replay over and over. That's only if you're trying to be perfect, but it's an annoying oversight that persists in the HD versions. Outside of that, the game splits itself into day, afternoon, and night team. In my mind, I always understood that as each part of the world being permanently stuck in that time of the day. Each of the levels are split into smaller parts that later open up. You will end up having at some point a tag in multiple areas of town. It's basically like the usual tagging, but without enemies this time. That's why I didn't count it as a 4th style. Those parts really do the most with the levels, but become a bit monotone, especially without confrontation. I always said that modern games were too formulaic. No, all games were not perfect and some were too obtuse, but they're definitely better on average. People just can't accept a difficulty curve and want instant gratification. On the other hand, some games were just awful. Jet Set sits in the middle, closer to being a game you have to get used to than being awful. Its more superficial aspects carry it, but it's without a doubt a great piece of media. It's worth being played. Just make sure that you just play the game normally. You might not want to get the best ranking on every stage. It's jank enough as it is.